Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Built by BIPOC. My name is Carissa Begonia. I am a business coach for BIPOC entrepreneurs, a LinkedIn expert, and top voice. I'm a second generation Filipino American daughter of immigrants and the first and only in my family to start my own business. I truly believe that entrepreneurship is the path to equity and that life design is liberation. And at Conscious Exchange, we're creating an ecosystem and a movement of BIPOC entrepreneurs with a shared mission to achieve time, location, financial, and occupational freedom for themselves, their families, and their communities. So I started Build by BIPOC because I've just been tired of hearing that there isn't enough BIPOC talent out there. I'm also really tired of being the first, the only, or the other in spaces I often find myself in, whether that's in business. So here I highlight the journeys and the practices of my fellow BIPOC entrepreneurs and coaches, consultants, creators, service providers, all folks who are building their own tables, creating new pathways for work, and defining success on their own terms. I'm really, really excited to introduce you to my friend today, Ashmi Patel. Hello.
Yeah.
Hi, Ashmi. All right, all right. So a little bit about Ashmi. Um, so Ashmi is a first generation Indian American child of immigrants. She likes to describe herself as wildly curious, easily excitable, a deep feeler, and a constant daydreamer. In her 30s, a diagnosis of ADHD reshaped her outlook on life, granting her the freedom to design a path that resonated with her unique strengths and interests. This newfound clarity was fueled her desire to support others, particularly BIPOC women and those with ADHD, on their journey towards self discovery and fulfillment. So welcome, Ashmi, and thank you so much for joining me today on Built by BIPOC. I'm really excited to have a conversation with you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited too.
Well, to kick things off, why don't we have you just introduce yourself a little bit more to the audience?
Yeah. Well, thanks for the brief introduction. That's a good kickoff into my vibe. I love sharing the stuff about my excitability and my feeling because I feel like that helps give people an idea of just the experience you're going to have when you talk to me. But I'd love to talk a little bit more about just my coaching kind of mission and approach. So for me, as Carissa mentioned, I got diagnosed with ADHD in my 30s. So I know what it feels like to live with undiagnosed ADHD for decades and the compounded shame and burnout that comes from that. So when you're an adult and someone finally tells you that you have ADHD, one, it just completely changes your perspective, but then you realize all of the things that you have internalized from not knowing that you had this diagnosis. And I do think that that's unique to the experience. I think there's a lot of grief that also comes with getting a late diagnosis of just thinking about how much easier your life could have been or all of the things that you could have achieved or the support you could have had you known earlier. So I really do like to honor those pieces because I think they are unique to maybe somebody who may have known that they had ADHD as a child. So for me, I really like to say I help my clients break free from shame, survival mode, burnout, and overwhelm, and help them get closer to a life that has a lot of ease, space, and choice. And I like to say I'm about soft accountability and slow journeys. So you're not going to get tough love from me. I would say most of my clients, if not all of them, are already really hard on themselves. So I like to do the work to help them be kinder to themselves and give themselves that grace. And I come from the approach of radical self-acceptance so that we can just recognize that accepting ourselves is the way to that freedom and liberation rather than constantly feeling like there's something about us we have to fix. And so I'm a little bit allergic, or a lot of it allergic to the what's it called? The phrase ADHD or productivity hack.
Mm.
I would rather have us accept the way we are and find different support systems and different skills that work and help support us in the way we need to be. So yeah, that's a little bit or a lot of it about myself.
Amazing. I'm there's so many like things. I was just taking some notes on like these key like phrases and words, and I'm like, oh, say more, say more. But I'm sure we're gonna dig in and get into it. And the reason I wanted to have you on the show, Shmi, was because I think in your own journey of us working together, right, and hearing like you talk about ADHD, and really owning that part of your identity now, I feel like you're not alone in having this late stage diagnoses. And then like now what, right? Like I get a lot of people conversations, a lot of my clients or other folks I come across, other entrepreneurs talking about this, and so I think it's a really hot, important topic to address. And so I'm really, really interested in getting into that. So before anything, though, on Built by BIPOC, we talk a lot about identity, especially as racialized people, because we're often judged by our identities. And there are identities that are visible and there are ones that are invisible. And I'm just curious for you to kick things off with, what identities are you most proud of sharing with others today, especially? And what are some of the parts of your identities that maybe you wish more people knew or understood about you?
Yeah. My brain has like so many answers for this all at the same time. So I think obviously the very visible identity is that I am Indian American, right? So that's an identity that I can't necessarily hide or isn't invisible. And then my invisible identity of having ADHD is something that, one, I think I had to come to terms with in order to share so publicly, because it came with a lot of internalized shame that I had built up over the years. So I will say I'm proud of sharing both of those. One is seen much more than another. And I have had to, I think it's a work in progress of just feeling like because people can't see my ADHD, it may not be as valid. Because I do think that with those of us that have invisible identities, that is something that we can feel a lot of times. And with model minority myth, I think there are a lot of times where people, especially maybe Asian folks, may not get diagnosed as often because of the things that come with the model minority myth. And so there's a lot of times where I feel even more emboldened to share that I have ADHD, so that other folks who might feel like no one's going to believe them have someone to resonate with or someone to see themselves in.
I love that. It's like as you connect it to the model minority myth, right? It's because agents already are less likely to go seek out, say, mental health services, right? And then we're supposed to be away, right? We're supposed to be the good minorities, the smart ones, whatever. And then the stereotype of Asians, right, is that we're hardworking and that we can be successful and all that. Yeah. And not that there's any struggle, but it just is. So I appreciate you connecting that, and even how that's sounds like landed as a mission of yours to say, hey, like you're not alone in this, and I understand if you want to have a conversation about it. Like I'm also really down for that, because it's about being heard and about being seen. How has that maybe this new mission really kind of fueled your or this new like kind of way of or acknowledgement of and like acceptance of it really fueled your business, your like just how you walk around in the world and life generally, your relationships?
Yeah, I mean, one, it's definitely helped me on the self-advocacy piece of just being better at identifying what I need and feeling emboldened enough to share that with people around me, as well as feeling brave enough to share that on the internet or like widely for people to hear, right? Because that, I think for me at the beginning, visibility was really scary. It still can be for sure. But I also saw it as a privilege that I do have my own business and I do have the privilege to share that I have ADHD without being scared that my boss is going to, penalize me for it. Or there's lots of safety issues at work if you want to disclose a diagnosis. And so I think for me, this acceptance of it was one, great on a personal level, but also added to my mission of, well, I'm lucky enough to have my own business that is centered around this. And so I can talk about it publicly, while there probably are a lot of people that don't feel like they have the safety to do that. So I'll talk about it so that they can then come talk to me in private in a place that is safe for them.
Yeah. Earlier we were talking about radical self-acceptance, and curious about even, that journey with so many messages that we get, and with the Asian American identity, model minority myth, just being a woman, right? Just existing sometimes feels hard, and just existing maybe even feels like a radical idea, that to just own that, right? And so would love to hear like that journey of, was it always this confidence, or did that take time to build up towards, and kind of, was there a turning point? Is there a story? Was there a time, or was it a more gradual thing where like, you know what? Forget it, right? Like, this is me and I love it, and I love me, and you will love me too. Or otherwise, thanks for playing, right?
Yeah. I would say it was and is a journey, right? Like today's a great day. I'm feeling confident, feeling good. I could wake up tomorrow and be like, what's happening? So I do want to normalize the fact that it is a journey. And especially for people with ADHD, we do have more of a tendency for the rumination and the sensitivity to rejection. Like all of those are real things for us. And so this idea of consistently being confident or consistently showing up, I think for anybody is not realistic, but especially if you are late diagnosed ADHD, our tendency to ruminate on the negative, we are a little more prone to that. But I think for me, like in my 20s, I did reach a place where I was just like, I'm really tired of feeling like this. And I just can't keep feeling bad all the time. And that was just the beginning of my like self-love work. I remember a therapist asking me, do you love yourself? And I didn't even know how to answer that, truly. I was like, I don't know what that means. And then I had to learn what that meant. And then, yeah, like after getting my ADHD diagnosis, more and more, I was just like, to me, it gave me the freedom to say, oh, this is how my brain is wired. It's not my fault, because I had a lifetime of thinking it was my fault that I wasn't trying hard enough. And as soon as I had the knowledge of like, oh, my brain just works differently and I wasn't given the tools to do things differently. So it's not my fault. I just need to try it another way and adapt and accept.
You bring up a good point of like, we're having to work harder to prove yourself, and just again, as a woman of color, and in maybe in these feelings again with dealing with ADHD and not knowing, and so like it felt maybe like running, chasing, adapting. I'd love to hear the victory story of that. It's like, when have you like expected to again prove or something where you were expected to be away, do something, or even underestimated. And I would love to hear a time like where you defied those expectations and you just did the thing and showed and proved everyone wrong.
Yeah. I mean, I think starting the business is my big one, right? Because I don't necessarily think people didn't think I could or whatever, but I didn't think it was a surprise that I all of a sudden was like, hey, I'm going to start my own business and do this thing. And now all of a sudden I have all these things to say. And because I was a very passive child, and coming into my voice was a gradual thing into adulthood. So anyone who's known me for a long time, I think, wouldn't have expected this part of my journey. And also just the journey of accepting that I have an interest-based brain and using that to build my business. So even in the entrepreneur world, where it is really like, I've been lucky to find a really supportive community, there's still lots of things that I have to decide that don't work for me, because that's just not how my brain is wired. And that has taken a lot of, I guess, like unexpected decisions where people think I should do something and they're well meaning to give me the advice. But I'm just like, that is just not going to work for my brain. And I'm going to have to do it a different way, even though I don't see anyone else doing it that way. So it feels very scary. But but I've just had to learn to honor what I know is going to work for me versus what someone else thinks should, or they're just sharing because it worked for them.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be hard and feel kind of lonely sometimes.
Well, with that, can you give an example of something that maybe you ran into that maybe is very common for entrepreneurs, so that maybe they can see in you, like, yeah, wait, me too, and I have had to adjust that because that's the common prescription, but that prescription doesn't work for me. Is there an example?
Yeah. I think the one that comes to me earliest is when to hire support.
Okay.
So like a lot of advice I got was like, you don't need to hire support until you're at a certain level in the business, which I do think is very valid advice. And I followed it for a really long time. And then I got to a point in the business where I was just like, I need to externalize a lot of the tasks that just aren't getting done. Because one, I don't have the executive function to necessarily get them done at the rate that they need to get done. And I have an interest-based brain. So if something is always going to be boring to me, it's just not going to get done. And so that combo of like radical acceptance of like my brain finds that really boring. And if I give this to someone else and ask for that support, then I will have much more time and capacity to do the things that I want to and need to. So I hired support a lot earlier than I was advised to, or a lot earlier than I saw other people do it. But it was a great decision practically, but also it just I think it released something in me to like normalize asking for support and help when I needed it versus when people thought I needed it, which was, as a recovering people pleaser, it took a lot of like hyping myself up and being like, you need this, so that's enough to ask for it.
Yeah. Ooh, I see how that's part of that radical self-acceptance and radical self-love. It's like, I need this thing. All the advice, common advice is to not, but whatever. And that's enough. I don't need to explain and prove it to myself. I have to prove it to other people, but like, I don't need to prove things to myself. I love that, Ashmi. Similarly, as I've been hearing a lot more folks talk about ADHD. There's coaches coming out here, saying they specialize in that, and I wonder sometimes if I'm in an echo chamber and in a bubble of people who care about supporting each other with their different needs. Do you still find that? So do you find this conversation is becoming more normalized and accepted, or are you finding that folks are still largely saying like, we'll just figure it out or get over it, or like, yeah, whatever, like everyone deals with that? Like, what have you been kind of sensing about the conversation around ADHD?
Yeah, that's a good question. One, I ask myself about the echo chamber a lot because I'm like, oh, I'm in this like DEIB world where people care about this and talk about it. So, but I do think the conversation is becoming more common. On the flip side, I still hear a lot of like, oh, but you're so smart. I didn't know you, like, how could you have ADHD? Like, I'm still have people telling me that. And I'm like, they're not mutually exclusive. Or just like, it's still really common for people to be like, oh, like everyone's a little ADHD. And, and I do think, and I do this work with my clients as well, like deciding when it's worth you explaining that versus not, because I do think that commonality is going to take a while to go away, of like people just feeling so okay saying like everyone's a little ADHD, or it's like a pretty common phrase for people to be like, oh, I'm just being so ADHD, like, or ADD. And if you have it, you are like, no, it's like a whole thing. And so I think that's when the radical acceptance comes in, of like, once you accept it for yourself, you don't always feel the need to push the conversation where it doesn't need to be pushed. But I do think there's a lot more conversation about people supporting neurodivergent folks in the workplace. I think it's talked about a lot more in like the coaching industry. So that's my yes and no answer. I think more people are talking about it. At the same time, I do think that there's a lot of work to be done on the side of just understanding neurodivergence, ADHD, especially in women.
Yeah. Especially women, and maybe as you were saying earlier, being an Indian woman as well. Does that, like, do you find support in your communities, or do you also find part of your work being like, and if you, for more folks who look like me, come, we can have a safe conversation.
Yeah. I think as an Indian woman and just like being a part of the BIPOC community at large, I think I like to talk about how much how those layers add to my approach, because not only if you have ADHD, then there's a lot of work of like self-acceptance, self-advocacy, and just understanding yourself. But then being a woman of color just like adds all the layers of the self-doubt and the shame and the guilt and all of the things that we've like societally been taught. And so it's just a lot of piling on top of each other. And so I do like to call out that there is a unique approach to understanding that, oh, you might be feeling this because of your ADHD. And then at the same time, culturally, that's probably what's been taught to you for all these years. And so there's two layers that we're going to have to work through. And I do think it's important for people to feel seen in all their layers, because you can kind of give the wrong advice. It just won't work for somebody if you don't understand everything that they're working with.
This is, what's coming up for me is when I meet newer business owners, especially coaches, and they question me, especially because I work with people of color, right? And they're like, well, the market's saturated. There's so many people talking about ADHD, this, right? Or this topic, that topic, whatnot. And I'm like, yes, and do they look like you? Mm-hmm. Right? Because of these intersecting like identities, the multiple layers of things that we're juggling and having to think about and work towards, right? And or undo, right? Some of the learning that we have to undo. Yeah, I think that's that extra part, Ashmi, where I'm so proud of to see how you've evolved your business, and owning this identity, because I know it wasn't, super like forward in the beginning.
Yeah.
But people are looking for someone who looks like them or has maybe similar backgrounds, again, identities, experiences, culture, to relate to feel like they can actually say what they need to say, and who understand, like, what it feels like when the aunties are doing their thing. But so I appreciate you. I'm just glad that like you have taken such ownership of this, and so now people can find you too and can come to you, and get your support.
Yeah, thanks.
I want to talk a little bit more about you as an entrepreneur and kind of the experiences you've had in as you grow your business, right? I know that we have, as people of color, we can be, one of the tenets of like white supremacy culture is perfectionism, right? And so we kind of strive for having a plan, right? And achieving that plan, getting an A+, right? But that's not how entrepreneurship works. And would love to just kind of hear a little bit about, okay, were there some times where you've had this goal, you've had this plan, and business life or whatnot was like, nope, actually we're gonna throw you a curveball here. We're not gonna let it be that easy. What's a challenge you've had to overcome, and what did you learn about yourself in that challenge?
Yeah, there's so many to choose from, Carissa.
Just one. Don't try to like overachieve this.
I know you were talking about perfectionism, and I was like, yeah, that shows up for women of color and ADHDers a lot. I think for me, I was not prepared for the the mirror that entrepreneurship is.
Ooh.
So it really just brings out all the things that need to be brought up for you. And as much as, especially if you're providing a service that is targeted towards any sort of like minoritized or marginalized community, or any sort of like healing growth type work, everything that pops up, even if you want to maybe circumvent it or go around it, you really got to just go through it in order to come out on the other side. And especially for me, like I'm never going to suggest or talk to my clients about something that I haven't tried myself or that I wouldn't try. And so that is a lot of positive peer pressure for me to do the self healing and the growth work. But I don't think I was prepared for how much of it really shows up at the beginning. And, like when you start your business, you think what's going to be hard is figuring out how to file to be an LLC, or do I need a lawyer, an accountant, or whatever. And all of that is really hard. But I think what's harder is like my inner child coming out and telling me not to be visible, and me having to like heal that part of myself in order to feel safe to show up, or just all of the self-doubt and the shame that has compounded over the years. And when you're trying to be a business owner, you got to work through that in order to build something that's sustainable and will stick around for as long as you want it to.
You're so right, because you are the ultimate decision maker, right? And overseer. There is no boss to check things against. There's or ask for permission, or like the permission is your self permission. And also the check-in. Like no one's necessarily going to check in unless you ask for that. And I totally feel you with if inner child is freaking out on something, she ain't gonna go ask for help or even search for a lawyer or do that step. Forget the actual conversations, right? But like even finding the one and deciding to get on a call with that person isn't gonna happen. So appreciate you for sharing how it's not just the technical know-how of things. That is wildly important to know what to do. It's funny when you bring up the filing for the LLC, because that's often the first question. It's like that's like not actually that important right now. It's more do I have the right, like who am I to be talking about this, bringing my thought leadership here, like supporting others in this, like why would anyone listen to me, right? Those conversations is with yourself like are the ones that are a bigger blocker, like maybe you were sharing that to entrepreneurship, than the actual physical hurdles of how to do marketing or how to file an LLC.
Yeah, if someone a year ago had asked me like what my thought leadership is or any of that, to be honest, it was not a thought that I had considered before starting the business, because I just felt like I just thought that's the stuff that would work itself out. Like once I got all the logistical pieces set and I knew how many hours I could coach and I had my process and whatever, then I just thought I would be able to do it. And that is so not true.
Oh, it's so different for all of us. And it'll be seasonal too, right? Sometimes this will flare up, and then you're like, oh no. You say that that responsibility, right? And checking in and asking for the things, it's all on you. And that pressure is even more intensified, or that mirror gets shown to you when you now have a team of folks too that you also have to be the decision maker for, and the person to check in, like with like ask and find out and see if things are okay, even if you don't want to. So I totally feel you on all of that. One thing I wanted to kind of understand about too, like maybe some of the change that has happened for you, since you like but prior to getting your late diagnosis with ADHD to now, like, have you noticed a huge difference in just your approach, or just, again, self-acceptance maybe by one thing, but in other ways, how has that like, manifested in other ways that have like really been supportive of you, um, and also how what you might need or ask for?
Yeah. Um, I think the it has always been really hard for me to ask for help. And
A
I
child of immigrants.
exactly, right? And that's where the layers came in. So childhood immigrants did not want to ask for help. Then decades of undiagnosed ADHD. So I really internalized that asking for help meant I couldn't do something, and that people would be like, oh, well, she doesn't know how to do that. That's why she needs help. So like put all that together, and I really wasn't asking for anything from anybody. And I do think that with starting the business and getting the diagnosis, and also helping other folks who are getting their diagnoses, I have learned to ask for support earlier rather than later, right? I've learned to identify the spiral earlier on and ask for support before I'm like deep into it. And also to honor what my brain, what works for my brain earlier, rather than like trying it all the other ways in order to realize that those don't work for me, because I learned that that's what tires me out. So by the time I get to doing what I know I want to, then I'm just like too exhausted to do it. So that whole cycle has shortened, and I'm much more emboldened to just be like, oh, I'm not going to be able to do it that way, because that's just not the way my brain works. So why don't we just skip all of that and make a decision that it's going to work for us, and have the energy to do that right away?
I love it. The adapting and learning about yourself, right? And probably thinking about how intuitively, some of this, like what you need and what you want, and again, permission giving to ourselves. It's okay to ask for that, and to start with that ask rather than try it all the ways that everyone else may suggest, when I know that this is actually the way that it works for me.
Yeah.
So we've talked about kind of adapting and adjusting or relearning things, but I would love to hear too um how maybe your ADHD diagnosis like is an advantage for you, right? Like,
Mhm.
and it's like, this I'm not apologetic about at all, right? Like, y'all would be better off if listen to me in this, because this is very clear. Like, this method is just how everyone should do things, right? Have you seen that on the flip side as well?
Yeah, I have. And that's been a more recent part of my journey, but I'm like really glad that it's coming up much more clear now. And I do think that being a coach for other women with ADHD has like really helped me on the personal side for that. Um, One, I'm just really good at researching. Like we will hyper focus. So I will obsess about something I'm interested in and just deep dive into it. But then I know all these facts and I know all this information. And I didn't really realize that I've been doing this for most of my life, where someone will say like, oh, what do you think of that? And I'm like, oh, let me give you the download of what's in my brain about that specific topic. And I think I still feel a little bit, but I used to be really self-conscious about that, until I realized how much of a gift it can be for people who don't want to spend all their time researching things. And as a coach, I do think it's one of my biggest strengths, right? Like if me with something and we're working through it and I have a bunch of information in my brain, then that'll save them all the work of having to go through that, and then they can pick what they want to do. So um, that is a strength I love. And then also just I have a lot of hobbies, because I used to think that I was someone who didn't finish things, but really I'm just someone who has a lot of interests, and I go through cycles of what I'm interested in at the time. But yeah, I'm never going to get bored, because I'll always find some new thing that I'm really into.
I love it. I is what makes you super interesting and have a lot of things to say, your opinions and your thought leadership on those things. I'm glad that again your radical self acceptance has allowed you to embrace that and share it, and also bring people towards you who are earlier in their journey to ask for that support, right, and actually get it, and not maybe like earlier for you, or like, I'm asking for help, but I'm just being gaslit right now. Like no one is helping me. Um, so that seems to be an experience, huh?
Yeah, when I told my therapist I thought I had ADHD, she was like, "Oh no, you don't. You're just doing this, this, and this." And luckily at that point I was so convinced I had it, I still went to get diagnosed, and then I got my diagnosis. So when you were saying that, I was like, yes, absolutely. I have literally had people tell me that that no, you don't. So yeah.
Proving people wrong again and again, and that you know yourself. So just give me what I need. um, so one of the other things that I'll say that people of color can sometimes struggle with, immigrants, children, immigrants, especially, with not just asking for help, but also self promotion, right? And celebrating our own accomplishments. Would love for you to share a time that, in your journey, whether this was maybe in your career or more recently as an entrepreneur, what are you most proud of?
Yeah, I feel like this is a broader answer, but I really am proud that a year ago I essentially quit my job and started a business, because little Ashmi could never imagine. Like she just wouldn't have been able to grasp the concept that I would have my own business in my early 30s. And I like recently hit my 1 year mark last month, and I was just thinking, thanks. I was just thinking about all the things, and I met you at the very start of my journey, so we've known each other since then. And yeah, I'm just really proud that I just figured it out. All the things, the LLC, the growth, how to file your taxes, all the stuff that I didn't know anything about a year ago. And learning how to be visible, learning how to talk about my thought leadership and put myself out there, all of that happening in a year. Yeah, I'm really proud of that.
Has there been anything that's like super exciting that maybe like inner child or younger Ashmi was like, what? like, is there a specific thing that has happened recently? You're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened, or I did that.
I mean, I think as an avid podcast listener, the fact that I've been on a podcast episode and I've like recorded a couple others it's just surreal, because I think before you do something, you see yourself on the other side of, oh, I'm a listener. I love podcasts, but I'm on the listening side. And you just never imagine that there would be a time and a place where somebody would ask you to be on one. So that was a fun, like, pinch me moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally feel you on that. Even not even like younger Carissa, but even earlier entrepreneur Carissa, I had zero desire, or it wasn't even on my radar to become a public speaker by any means. And then to have done several engagements, be paid 5 figures for engagements, it's like, what? Like, this is a thing. So I feel you with the podcasting, and it's just, this was not something I thought it was even on the radar at all, right? So that's really cool. So, as I love talking about identity and like personal journeys on the show, and I also, because I think that's really inspiring for folks to be able to see themselves in you and then take their own actions. I also believe in practical tips. So, as I would love for you, if there a specific tip, for entrepreneurs that are, say, getting started, like, is there something that, if you could go back to a year ago and reset, you're like, you know what, like, this is what we need to focus on first, not what I thought. It's actually this. Do you have a suggestion around that?
I would say there's like 6 billion things popping into my head at the same time. I think I wish I had learned to embrace changing my mind earlier on, because especially at the beginning, you're just constantly learning all the stuff, one about entrepreneurship, but then about yourself within that realm. And there were a lot of times where I just got really stuck on, well, I decided to do it this way, so I have to do it that way. But at that point, I had learned so many new inputs and so many new things about myself that it would have been smarter to embrace the change and go with what I had learned. So yeah, I would say give yourself permission to change your mind a lot, and don't feel like you're being fickle. Like, you're just learning about yourself and about what it is to run a business. And I think it's smart to change your mind, because if you don't, then you're just stuck on something that's just old news, and it doesn't serve you anymore.
Thank you so much for reiterating this point that I make to people all the time. Where I see this show up a lot is like, I'm writing a website and I'm like, why? Why are you spending the thousands of dollars for someone to do it, or yourself or many hours, which equals thousands of dollars of your own consulting time on yourself to build it? Where I was like, I guarantee you this is going to change. We don't know enough about your method, your framework. You just don't know enough yet. So like, let's put an MVP out there and go. But how resistant people are, like not just on a website, but just like you were saying, I'm stuck on this idea and I gotta run with it, right? And really hearing it's not being fickle. There's such constant. We accept this in tech or big tech, but maybe we see the end product of Apple. We don't see the many iterations that have gone behind that, right? For it to be such a good product, why don't we think we can do that for ourselves? That out the gate, why isn't this, the iPhone like 100 right now? Isn't it perfect? And so thank you for just reiterating that it's not fickleness. It is actually smart, and allow yourself to pivot and change because I guarantee you find your stride as you start testing. You start to be like, I don't actually like that. I thought I would, but actually, I guess, right? I mean, even earlier on, like I was asking you about, are you ready to talk about ADHD and call folks in for that? You're like, no. And at the time, that was probably actually the right choice, right? And it's evolved. And so I'm embracing that. Let's entrepreneurship, I say, is always like, it's either one massive experiment or many, many mini ones. Because even I think as you become more successful and you keep doing the things, you still change those too, right? And you iterate. Like, you have a signature offer and then you add 3 more, or your marketing styles change and such. People rebrand for a reason. Big companies will change their logos for a reason, right? So anyway, thank you.
Yeah. And I think I do this with my clients a lot, where I just call them like little mini research projects, where I'm like, why don't we just try the thing for the week? And then like, we need data in order to feel good about something, and you can't do the data collection unless you're constantly trying things. And when people have asked me like, oh, how is it running a business? I'm like, oh, the phrase like throwing spaghetti against the wall? Well, at the beginning, it's throwing spaghetti into a black hole until you build a pile long enough for the spaghetti to stick to. So I'm like, to get that mountain of spaghetti, you gotta change it up and keep trying things.
Yeah, I'm just visually seeing this in my mind, and it's cracking me up because I feel it. I feel that hard. Especially when you don't think it's the black hole at all, because you're just like, this is the best idea. Like, why isn't it?
Why isn't it sticking? And you're like,
here's the going.
Stick to.
Oh, I love it, Ashmi. All right. We're about to wrap up our interview here, but one of the things I like to do on the show also is do this rapid fire round. Are you down? Are you cool with that?
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. All right. I'll give you a second. Are you ready?
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to ask you a few questions and whatever comes to your mind. I wasn't supposed to.
I wasn't supposed to own my own business. Kinder.
And I am most grateful for.
Having a support system that allows me to choose the life that I want.
Great. Well, Ashmi, again, thank you so much for joining me on Built by BIPOC. This is an opportunity for you to maybe be on your edge here, or maybe not because you're comfortable with this now. But I would love for you to, share more about any offers you have going on, anything special for the moment, anything you're working on that's really exciting that you would like the audience to know more about.
Yeah. Honestly, I'm just most excited about my one-on-one coaching offer. I offer 6-month and 12-month packages. I'm excited because I do think it's not very common for a coach to offer a year-long package. And I specifically offer that just because I do think that when you're early on in your ADHD journey, having that weekly cadence for a longer period of time can be really, really helpful as you're just learning about your thing, like yourself, and it gives you the space to maybe do some of the what's showing up in real time work. So I'm just always excited to talk about the fact that I have one-on-one coaching availability because I love groups, I love communities, but that getting to work with someone on a one-on-one capacity, you really get to dig in deep and get to the good stuff together. And so if anything that I talked about today is of interest, I also just love getting DMs from people and having coffee chats and getting to talk to new folks. So I welcome all of the messages and questions, and even just if you want to pop in and say hello, I would love to meet you.
Yay. All right. Well, Built by BIPOC is perfect for that because it is about connection. And I'm very intentional about doing the show live on LinkedIn because of how easy it is to connect right here. So for y'all, if you liked anything that Ashmi had to share here today, I very much encourage you to follow her, connect with her, DM her, get on my coffee chat. Ashmi, is there any other kind of platforms, any other things that you want to add to how people can connect with you, get in touch with you?
No, I'm doing a series of lives that you'll see once you start to follow me, and I do them with a friend of mine who's also a coach, and they're just really good topics that come up a lot with our clients, and they're the perfect mix of like mindset and practical tools and tips. And I would love to see more folks there and hear about what's showing up for you.
Awesome. All right. Well, then, like you said, follow her on LinkedIn and you'll be seeing that series. But again, thank you again so much, Ashmi, for joining me on Built by BIPOC. Just want to thank the audience also for watching Built by BIPOC. If you couldn't join us live, that's all good. The replays are, or of our events are all available on our YouTube channel. You can find like our past speakers, our trainers, our trainings, community events, etc. And we'll put the link after this live below so you can go check that out. And with that, we'll see you next time. Invite your friends and let's go build our liberatory futures together. Bye, y'all.